All right. Well, that was a great lively conversation, and we're going to continue the conversation here. So this next session is called Old Homes and New Problems, the challenges to maintaining adequate housing stock, something we've been talking about all day long. And so I'm joined up here on stage, and this is in alphabetical order, not seating order. Lance Barton is the Executive Director of Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro Habitat for Humanity. With 20 years of nonprofit experience in food and shelter, Lance has helped Habitat to increase its capacity from 1 house a year to 6, and they're now beginning a 22-townhome development in Stanton. I'm also joined by Tim Murphy, and who is the Policy Advisor for Housing and Livable Communities at AARP Public Policy Institute. He conducts research and policy analysis and develops resources for policymakers, planners, and community members and other stakeholders. We've got Jesse Rutherford, who is the Board of Supervisors Chair of Nelson County, and in addition to his role as a Board of Supervisors Chair, Jesse is currently a real estate broker, builder, and property manager and developer. And then we also have Jen Serber up here with us. She's the managing member and owner of Serber Development and Consulting. Jen develops affordable multifamily housing in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Kentucky. So join me in welcoming our panelists up here. So, Jen, I'd like to start with you. A question here. Many residents in urban settings cannot afford to buy a home, or suburban or rural, so they rely on rental units that they can afford and are convenient to work and school. What elements are necessary to come together for a developer to create affordable quality rental units and still make a profit?
Good luck.
Yeah.
It's a little softball there for you.
It's a little bit of a mission, but just to let folks know what we do. I developed 130 units in Stanton, a project called Mountain Laurel Manor. I'm working as a consultant for the Taft Mills Group, who is developing 130 units in the city of Stanton. Actually, Mountain Laurel Manor 3 is Stanton address, but Augusta County. Together, we are developing 50 new units in the city of Stanton beginning in the spring, and then I'm developing 50-unit new construction development over in Stewart's Draft, also beginning in the spring. What's necessary to get all those units there? Well, land that we can afford. If anybody has been by the Middlebrook Trace development over the last few weeks, it looks a lot like a rock quarry at the moment. Getting ready to go vertical in the next couple of weeks. So obviously it's a big struggle finding a piece of dirt that we can afford. Having the community support, we've gotten a lot of support from Augusta County and the city of Stanton in a lot of different ways, but we could use their support in some other ways. Forgiveness of tap fees would be super handy. Designations of revitalization areas would be very helpful to our applications for tax credits. And then good luck in obtaining the tax credits themselves and piecing together the rather complicated finances that are involved in any of these developments.
Okay, great. So the thread that I heard running through all of those is subsidy. I mean, some kind of funding to make the numbers work out. Yeah. Okay, all right. Lance, this one's for you. Habitat's been around for a long time. How is Habitat's model evolving to ensure affordable housing stock? I think oftentimes people think of Habitat like 1 house a year. It's not a scalable solution. How is Habitat evolving to do some work at scale?
That's a loaded question. I love it. Everything has changed in the last 8 years. Everything has changed in the last 5 years, in the last 3 years. What we have worked really hard to do over the last 6, 7 years is to take ourselves out of the traditional model of volunteer-led build projects. To put it bluntly, it's just inefficient. And what we're moving towards more and more, and in fact, Brad Airwood's back here, who's an integral part of bridging that gap between the old mission and the new, is the future for us is to be a general contractor, to be somebody who hires out these works so that professionals can do it and do it on a timely basis and do it at the capacity we would like. So, and to me, it's really encouraging because although, as Jen said, there's a lot of roadblocks to any kind of development. What we don't want to be the roadblocks is holding on to our traditions that simply are not relevant in today's market.
Great, thank you. Tim, your turn. Can you speak to some of the specific housing needs for seniors? We've heard about kind of getting developments in place and some of the challenges there. Tell us a little bit about the senior market and how that plays into all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's important to note with three important things with older adults. The first, through a nationwide survey of adults 18 and older that AARP conducts every few years, 2/3 of adults over the age of 18 and 80% of adults that are above the age of 65 want to remain in their communities as they age. So folks they love their communities, they love their homes, and they want to stay there as long as they can. A second thing is that when we look at our existing housing stock across the country, 1% of existing housing units has a set of 5 key accessibility features that would really enable folks to remain in their homes as they age. So these are things like a 0-step entryway into the home, single-story living, lever-style doors, wide enough hallways that could accommodate a walker or a wheelchair. And so there's a real disconnect in terms of what we have available that can really allow folks to live in their communities as they age. And then the third bit of info relates to our housing options. And across the country, in most communities, 2/3 to 3/4 of the housing stock are single detached houses. So what we're seeing are large single detached houses that aren't really set up to age in place or age in community. And we see that desire to age in place. And so as we think about kind of the needs of older adults, there are multiple steps that communities can take, and the development community is part of that as well. Communities can look at their existing zoning ordinances and think about, are there opportunities to make changes that could help facilitate additional housing options that might be more accessible, might be more navigable for an older adult. And then from the development community as well, thinking about building in these accessibility features from the jump, because we know that there's a desire in place for individuals to remain in their homes as long as they can, and our existing housing stock is not going to be able to meet that need.
Thank you. And then one last question before we open it up and kind of set the stage here. Jesse, kind of being in Nelson County, there's a uniqueness about rural communities. And so tell us a little bit, like, or is there, I'm making assumptions there, what are the unique trends in rural communities in regards to housing stock and ensuring that there's enough?
Yeah, sure. Born and raised Nelson County, we were much like a lot of Appalachia, an extraction-based economy for a long time of minerals. We are familiar with company housing, which many of you know about and we often talk about. It's almost as if, as we were from earlier talks, we're circling back to that in a way, demanding corporations step up and field some housing availability for people. There are many different struggles in the rural context, especially when you are part of the Blue Ridge topography. Everything's against you, the topography itself. You're fighting against affluent demographics coming from the metropolis area of DC, coming and buying up things everywhere. You're dealing with corporations coming in and buying swaths of housing stock with the financial backing of corporate America. You're getting to see these major movements. And, I'm sitting here listening to Jalil talk, and it's like talking to my friends from home when I first decided to run for office at that dumb point in my mind of pinnacle at 22 years old, trying to figure out why I was running, and it was for my friends, because they couldn't come back to Nelson County to live their life. To put in perspective, I got 400 years probably 300 years of history in my mama's family, just in that one area. And year over year, it's interesting to see it. If it wasn't for legacy property, they would have no opportunity to stay in rural communities. This is consistent across rural Virginia. The most common pathway to home ownership, other than conventional financing, is you got your grandmama's house, okay? And what does that mean for challenges? In rural communities like Nelson, I'm going to use area specifically Schuyler. For those of you who don't know the Waltons, say goodnight, you know, goodnight Grandpa, goodnight John Boy, right? That was a company town. The same housing stock that, you know, John Boy grew up with, Mr. Hamner, it's still there. Lived in with generations of people passing down that same home. So what does that look like? Over time, what was once a community of 3,000 people with a hospital, car dealerships, and a movie theater, and countless other amenities, is now a community of 250 families, all with the same homes. These homes have lead. They have asbestos. They have black mold. And absent of them having that home, they have no other option. And then when it comes to construction, which I have an interesting experience with that, I specialize in manufactured housing, that is also one of the more common methods that a lot of these individuals were able to infiltrate the housing market. But in today's world, with financing, cost of construction, we see it every day, and the complexities of that is very difficult. But the most difficult context, especially in the rural, and this is probably universal in suburban and urban, and y'all's experience, you're a big developer, so you live this all the time, NIMBYism. That alone, like, I wish I had 50 Jalils at that meeting. That way, when I walk, it's a gauntlet. You walk a gauntlet when you vote yes, and then you got to walk to your car. And like every so often, you're like, all right, Lord Jesus, this is it. For a duplex.
So just kind of teeing that up, it's a challenging context in terms of the costs of development and the zoning and the ordinances and trying to get all that to try to do it at scale from with a for-profit or nonprofit experience. Then the aging housing stock that can meet our aging population, those members of our population who are aging, and then in a rural context as well. So in the midst of those challenges, we see a lot of development. I mean, you're still working towards it, but it is a gauntlet, whether it's the literal gauntlet you walk after a vote or the gauntlet to get through to get a project done. I'm curious, where are you seeing bright spots in this work? Where are you seeing some signs of hope?
That's a great question, because I think my staff is very solution-based, very optimistic, and there are a lot of roadblocks, and we hear a lot of roadblocks today, but I'm also hearing solutions in the middle of this. And one of the things is that the for-profit and nonprofit are extremely similar, especially when the nonprofit is running well. The benefit of the nonprofit is that we have more power to decide what success looks like and determining what our bottom line is. I think one of the most important solutions in the future is going to be partnerships. It's going to be a partnership with the for-profit and nonprofit sector that's really going to make this work. Nonprofit by itself will not do it. For-profit by itself will not do it. You have a very different bottom line, and so do we. And so together, I believe, is going to be the core solution. There are advantages that a nonprofit has that a for-profit doesn't have, and vice versa. And so when I hear about a developer in my area that's doing 50, 150 houses, you know, what can we bring to the table that you may not realize that we have to offer? Historically, what we've had to offer is feel-good moments of a community and future homeowners coming together to build a house. It's just, it's done, and it's over. And I really, not to disparage the history of Habitat, because I've only been here 8 years and it's been here 50. And it's done a lot of really wonderful things. But Habitat International itself is recognizing that we are losing relevancy in the way that we operate. And we have to think outside the box. And I think one of the first places you're going to see real good outside the box thinking is in the nonprofit sector.
Others, where are you all seeing hope in the work?
I'm happy to jump in. I think when we think about the issues that I raise about being able to age in community, having additional housing options beyond the single-family detached house, we're seeing a lot of change across the country. In my role at AARP, I sit within AARP's policy department. We develop resources for AARP, the 53 AARP state offices around the country. We interface with our government affairs staff. And the state offices really do a lot of work at the state capital level and at the local level to help communities realize new opportunities for housing options. And so we're seeing a lot of different communities around the country exploring new types of housing options or reintroducing housing options that historically communities had in the early part of the 20th century but moved away from, things like duplexes and townhouses that were raised in the previous panel session. Accessory dwelling units or in-law suites, essentially a second smaller home on a property with a larger single-family home, allow for multi-generational living, provide an opportunity for an older adult to have a caregiver or have a grandchild, live on the property, and there's that opportunity for connection. So we're seeing a lot of activity at the local level, but also at the state level as well, in terms of state laws that are enabling local jurisdictions to make these changes.
Yeah, I'll hop in there on something both of you guys said. Lance, I agree with you. I think for me, it's rough out there right now. The rates where they are and construction pricing, I mean, it's rough. Last week I was worried to death I had a Civil War fort in Richmond. This week I can't get pressure on a test in York County. Probably going to spend like a couple $100,000 on a booster pump we didn't think we needed. So, lots of problems all the time. But I think a hopeful thing, especially in the community, this particular community, we have a partnership with the Valley Community Services Board on the 2 new deals that we're working on here. And we are providing space, Jay mentioned, providing space inside the communities for VCSB to come on site and provide supportive services to their PSH residents, which I think is really cool. Wherever Jay went, if you guys can introduce me to any of those folks who would like to come in and use some of our space to provide some of those, some of those training programs, our doors are open. We would love to have that opportunity for our residents on site. Everything that we are building is now universally designed, serviced by elevators, all of our units, almost 100%. On top of about 10% being fully 504 Type A accessible. And in our senior communities, we're tending to build 2 bedrooms. Folks want the extra space for living care or their grandkids or a hobby room, or a lot of 55-year-olds are still working. That day's getting close, guys. So I think, just to hop in there on what both of those guys said.
Yeah, and you know what, I think another thing that really occurs to me is that COVID was the worst and best thing that's happened to this country in many years. And it gave us permission to do things differently. It gave us permission to work differently. And it's not surprising because we are at our best when circumstances are at their worst. And I mean, Habitat is just coming around in the last few years to recognizing aging in place as being not just a cute program or a sexy fundraising tool, but just an absolute necessity. And so I'm thrilled to hear you come up and give suggestions of what aspects of universal design should be put into it. And I agree, because people are going to get older, and housing is going to shift from different demographics.
Jesse, do you have any hope?
Tell the bed bug story.
The bed bug story? No. I'll save that for. I just ate lunch. Yes, I do have hope. I mean, we've just now started seeing people in Virginia get elected on the basis that they support affordable housing. That is hope. Okay? Pre-COVID, still a non-starter conversation. We would anecdotally talk about it, say it's a big deal. Habitat would be like, yeah, we're over here, and give us a high five, and they're like, we don't want to talk to them. But now we're starting to see the dollars and cents flow. Now, they're going to studies. These are very critical things. People like Mel, they are the big advocates out there, and I strongly tell you now, please get them in your board meetings and get that data out, because that's how you start transforming minds. I think in the demographics that are most impacted, I'm starting to see organization. And when I say that, especially in Nelson County, our African American community, who doesn't have the most legacy property? It's those demographics. Home ownership hasn't been a benefit for them for a very long time. My family has a couple hundred years of owning the same 400 acres. For some of them, it started in 1970 and carried on from there. And them holding on to it is a very critical thing. So we're starting to see that organization, and we're starting to see advocacy groups in the rural context start staying with them. So where I'll end with the glimmer of hope, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk some more about this, is zoning reform. Because Virginia doesn't need passive reform, it needs radical.
Yeah.
Radical
Yeah.
in this sense. Single family dwellings, this is a unique thing. Suburban America is honestly this century. Before that, we were building cabins and hoping it lasted 5 years, and then we built another one. But prior to that, we were 3-generation households. I just referenced John Boy, okay? He might still be living there if Grandma and Grandpa were still around. I lived that myself, I wasn't until I was 25, 26 where I was able to buy a house. I lived with my dad. That is that part of that story. And that's the hope I have, is we're starting to see these groups start getting created. We're starting to have these conversations, which is the first step. Now we just got to follow that to the grassroots, and then when we vote on a duplex and we're fighting over, what is affordable or not, that I don't feel too lonely.
Yeah, and Justin makes a great point. Now is the time for radical.
Yes.
And part of it is because Mel, it's your fault.
Mel.
Yeah. You brought this to our attention, but now is the time. Now is the time to identify the people who can make these changes in our community. And a lot of times it could be 7 people, 5 people. City council members. I saw one of our candidates for city council was here earlier. And he happened to be a guy who gave me 2 hours to listen to a conversation about affordable housing. Who's got 2 hours? It meant a lot to me to have potentially elected officials giving me their ear.
All right, so before we turn it over to audience questions, you have 30 seconds each to name what is your one radical zoning change you would make if I gave you a magic wand to make. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Not a laundry list. You get one. You get one.
You go first.
You go first.
We're starting at this end? You're the one who raised it.
Fine. I often look at, you just talked about accessory dwelling units. We talk about 3-generation households. My gosh, what's wrong with having a duplex and Grandma and Grandpa living next door? Single family dwellings needs to be an option, not the mandate. Okay? We need to start looking at all zoning options and saying, hey, if you can satisfy the health department requirements, VDOT requirements, DEQ, and you're passing all those litmus tests, then yes, you can have a duplex.
Okay.
And
30 seconds up. All
sorry,
right.
50.
All right, so I've got 7. So,
7 seconds. All right. Go.
now, you know what? One of the biggest things, take R2 zoning, open it to R3. Would have a massive impact on multi-housing, on density, and on the ability to create affordable housing.
Okay. I thought you were going to say R2 to D2, but
Or that.
Beep up.
Gen X here. Remember, Gen X. All right. Jen.
I get to pick 30 sites throughout the state and just make them multifamily right now automatically.
Yep.
Word out.
Yeah.
Easy. Perfect. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I think echoing multiple people on this panel, expanding those single-family detached-only zones to small-scale multifamily. The duplexes, to your point, that is what people want. People want the multi-generational connections with, the parents and their adult children, with the grandkids there. Like, that builds community. To your point, Jay, in the last panel, like, having a sense of community, like having the closeness of familial connections and neighbors who know each other and care about each other, that is the crux of all this.
Okay, great. Well, I wish I had that magic wand to give you all your wishes would be granted fresh out. Maybe somebody out here has the magic wand, or if not, maybe you have some questions. So Avi's out there roving with the mic, and I'll let him choose the questions because I can't see because of the lights. There's a question over here.
Some bright lights.
Those are some bright lights.
I'm on the run.
I'm not good with mics, but my background is I volunteer with an organization, SACRA, Stanton Augusta Church Relief Association, and we see all of the problems that you've been talking about, generational poverty, single parents, children that are not getting proper daycare situations and so on. The one thing that we see, the volunteers, we talk about this all the time, is good paying jobs, skill-leveled jobs, vocational education. And I'm just wondering, how can we, that's not a short-term answer to any of this, I know that. But we need an educated workforce, we need good paying jobs, and I'm just wondering how we can encourage our legislature and get back to that acceptable component. We hear about the college loan programs and all of this. What about the internships and the job sharing experiences? What can we do to encourage that and get back to that model?
I'll take the government hat on that one. So Nelson County has a unique situation. We have essentially, it's about 3,000 jobs in Nelson that work every day, right? Of those 3,000, here's a fun stat. How many people who live in Nelson work Nelson County jobs? Well, we're only 14,000 people, so, but I appreciate that. That'd be all my cousins working, but 1,500. So of those 3,000. So it's like 3,000, 3,500. So that means about between 1,500 and 2,000 people every day drive into Nelson County to work Nelson County jobs. It's ironic that I stand here. I wore my Blue Mountain Brewery hat because I think it's about 50 to 60% of that workforce is coming from over here. If you go to Devil's Backbone and ask a bartender where they live, they're probably going to tell you they live in Stanton, oddly enough, or Richmond. So we talk about, vocational, and when I ran for office, VOTEC is where I live and breathe. I come from a family of builders. My uncles, my father, my grandfather, we've built homes. And we've gotten to a point to where it was like there was nobody to hire. And we talk about the big labor dry up that we had and the statistics that Mel, once again, I'll reference her statistics. We're building a third of what we were in peak 2007 when we were barely keeping up. That number's not getting better. So there is some interesting data coming out from the state on what our available workforce is. What I'm more concerned about is we actually are truly, it is certainly a training thing, and we should always advocate for more training, more training, more training. If I were to offer an HVAC class in Nelson County today, it would probably only have 3 kids show up. Our graduating student class is only at like 115 kids. Of that 115, 50% are going to college, and probably for some white-collar jobs that they're going to get. 10 of them are going to the military, and the other 30 is what we're divvying up to take those workforce-related jobs. That's not enough for that 3,000 job hole that we have. So yes, I agree with you. There is definitely some VOTEC. The bigger issue is we're running out of bodies to work jobs.
Yeah. Question back.
Wait, I can't see Avi. Do you have another question?
I'm back here,
Hold on.
Chris.
Okay, yes.
I had a question.
So I would like to piggyback on what Jane just said. There's people here who work at the factories. Fonda, I just ran into her. She's HR. There are great jobs available. And I think there's not confidence in people to leave fast food or other restaurant jobs, things like that, to seek these jobs that are available, and they're misled about what's required. Like, I'm a realtor, and I talk to people who want to buy houses, and when they tell me how much they make and I try to figure out what they can buy, I ask them why they don't seek a better job, like at Hershey or something, and they're like, well, I'm not going to work every day. Like, they don't give you a day off. So there's these misconceptions out there that I think this is where we need the education. So Blue Ridge Community College has started a program. I threw this idea out to my Rotary Club before I became president, and then somehow Blue Ridge was working on the same thing, where they are bringing in people to educate them on how to get these jobs at the factories and, the requirements, and to give them the confidence for when they do apply. But they don't have enough people to teach the people. That's why it's limited, just like our nursing programs. We don't have enough people to teach. So this is where I think, and I'm sorry, the government is not going to fix this for us. This is where I think the people at the factories, if they could somehow get involved, and not even at just the level of Blue Ridge, but in our schools. Like, I don't think our children are being taught what these jobs involve, what they offer. Like, I know people who retire from these factories with over $1 million in their retirement account, and Laura just backed that up. I mean, they're great jobs, and I just don't think people understand. I think they're hearing the wrong things on the street. So,
Okay, so, great. So I'm hearing questions around jobs, or some sentiments around jobs. I wish the other Jay were here, because those are great questions and comments for kind of what Jay was saying with economic development and kind of our previous session. Want to push the conversation towards around housing stock, and I think there's a correlation, because we saw in some of Jen's data that it's just the stock isn't there. So you could have all the great jobs in the world, but the stock isn't there for people to be able to live, even if they had the better income, because it's a supply and demand issue. And so I see a hand over here.
I think this.
Oh, sorry.
Uh-oh, it's Lou. So Jesse.
Yes.
Of the 3,000 jobs, and let's just use 3,000 in
Whatever,
Nelson, and 1,500 of them got to do with people that live in Nelson. Is there a housing need for the other 1,500 that come in? Is that part of the problem, or is it
Yes.
just folks want to live somewhere else?
And that's a really great segue, if you finish. Yeah. When you ask any of the people who are working at the facilities, and again, we have the best beer, wine, food. We all know it. It's okay. You guys are just second place. But if you ask any of those who work there, they would say, yeah, it's a workforce situation. And ironically, the very road that all those facilities are, where housing needs to somewhere be, and there have been opportunities, wonderful developers come and say, hey, we're going to build a $300,000 home. Now, our immediate reaction, that's not affordable. Well, in a lot of cases, when you're making 2 people are making $70K to get combined, that is actually affordable. But yes, the shortage is so radical that we've now had to start importing all of our workforce from the other metropolis areas, such as you all in Stanton, Waynesboro. And we're now starting to import workforce. We're starting to see it in our government from Appomattox, Campbell County. I mean, this is just how radical we're having to go out and find individuals to field our teachers, to field our deputies, to make this how unattainable housing is. If you take the starting pay of a deputy and say that deputy married a teacher, and she had a starting pay, and they had reasonable student loan debts with a reasonable car payment, because they're average human beings, they would be missing the median home purchase price based off a car by about $200,000. That's sad. These individuals are the staple of our society. They raise our children, they keep our communities safe. But they have no ability to participate in that community on the intimate level, which is such a shame. And we could sit here and we can tell the government, well, we need to make it a dollars and cents issue. Well, it's really hard to compete with the software developer who's making $500,000 a year, who's willing to pay $400,000 over market for that 20 acres that really nobody thought was worth it. And so it makes it a unique challenge.
Chris, question back here.
Thank you all so much. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you'd like to see local governments doing besides just zoning, and especially thinking about developing non-luxury housing and increasing the rate of development. What kind of developer incentives or other strategies you would like to see local governments doing?
I think it's going to be really tough to bridge that gap for the for-profit sector on non-luxury houses. But I think in our particular community, being Stan, Augusta, and Waynesboro, I think the government could take, the city government could take a much more pragmatic, possibly call it aggressive, move to blight, to land that's doing nothing, to abandoned houses that seem to get wrapped up in decades of nothing, except bringing the neighborhoods around them down. And nobody likes the word eminent domain, and it makes me shake in my boots, but I think we're at a place now where we do need to take action, and something does need to be done. And as we go around the city of Stanton, especially in the West End, looking at opportunities for infill, which is a sweet spot for a lot of smaller developers, there's a ton of them out there that could take a chunk out of the affordable need in our community. But you've got to get the city to take action.
You know, I'll just one quick thing to add on top of that. What do we want local governments to do? We need local governments to understand the criticalness of it. I can't tell you how much groupthink I get when they say, I don't see a housing problem, there is no housing problem. Then you got to deal with the they, thems. Oh, I don't want those people here, I don't want them people here because of whatever ism they might have in the back of their mind. At the end of the day, I do believe, and I'm going to offend a lot of other electeds, the state needs to start ponying up and taking some discretion away when we're talking about individuals who can't afford to live in a home, making sure that that housing stock starts becoming by right. I have some pretty strong conceptuals of that I won't go into. It'll take longer than 30 seconds. But
to kind of piggyback off of this young lady's piggyback, I was a cook. And when I first decided to maybe want to go to Target distribution, everybody tried to talk me out of it. Don't go there, you're gonna hate it. My manager told me I'd be back in 2 weeks. And now that I'm in there, I love it. And now that I'm in there, the stories that I were being told from people who stories were told to them because they didn't work there, it was just from one department of the warehouse. It wasn't the warehouse in its entirety that was bad. It was just one department. And this is more like a suggestion than it is a question. And like I said, I'm new to this, so don't crucify me if you guys are already doing this. But if you are, continue doing it. But I feel like some type of program should be set in place to go into the schools, middle schools, because now I have a 6th grader. And instead of just band and art, it's like, oh, well, now we're going to teach you about technology. And now we're going to teach you things that you actually need to know and can actually, you know, lead a good life learning instead of just knowing how to bang a drum. And so I feel like it should start in middle school where something should be in place that we're all in this room talking about now. The middle schoolers need to be talking about it. And the high schoolers need to be talking about it. And it should start at a lower level. That way we don't have to be 30, 40, 50 plus trying to figure out how to do this. And also, social media. Like, we should be talking about this. I should have heard about you guys way before I went through my situation, because I would have gotten involved way before I went through my situation. So I feel like it's not all about policies and government officials and politicians, but it's also about the people. And I understand that you guys are busy with those things, but if we could just reach out somehow and try to get to the youth and to the people who don't care about this, maybe we will find people who do care about this and they never knew that this was something to care about, like myself. That way we can get more people involved, there's more options, and there's more hope. And I just feel like it's important for a program to be in place, to go into the schools, to hit the streets, to hit social media, and see who all wants to be a part of this ongoing battle, because it's a battle that needs to be fought and it's a war that needs to be won. So that's all I need to say.
All right, we have time for about 3 more questions.
All right, I think we've got our 3.
All right.
You can be forward. Sit tight.
We've been talking a lot about economic development and bringing housing in. I want to focus more. Jalil, when you were living in a hotel, how much did you pay a night to live in that hotel?
Oh, man. Like 80, 90 a night.
Okay. And how much did you pay for laundry a week?
I don't even remember. It was a lot of money going in different directions.
And you didn't have a refrigerator that was large enough to hold a lot of food, much like no leftovers, because you're not going out to eat, because you got to put all your money into housing. How much was your food bill because you didn't have adequate food storage?
Double the amount it would normally be.
Okay. So in Waynesboro, we have 23,000 residents. And we have homes are selling, 2 days on the market, 6 days on the market. We've got a very low rate of available properties, and yet if we have 23,000 residents and half of our population is housing insecure, and only 5% of those people lose their houses, that's 115 people in the next, let's say if 5% lose their houses in this year. That's 115 people without housing. In the work that I do and my friends do in the social service sector and the nonprofit sector, we're already giving tents to people because they have lost their housing and there's nowhere for them to go. And hotels are not a viable option. We have people who are working and living in tents and saving enough money to get into a hotel 1 or 2 nights a week to get a shower. To get a shower before they have to go to a job interview so they can get a better job interview so maybe they can get out of that hotel. Has there been any focus on revamping or rehabilitating some of our hotels or some of these properties to provide the very lowest level of housing for persons who are in our ALICE population who have fallen between the cracks and don't have a way to get out because they're spending $3,000 a month just to be in a hotel?
Who runs the continuum? Who runs the continuum?
The COC. The COC for this area, Balance of State, that's Lydia.
Oh, you guys run the continuum of care? Are there any single-room occupancy, permanent supportive housing developments, single-room occupancy? Well then, I live in a similarly sized town to Waynesboro, and there's 12 units of permanent single-room occupancy, permanent supportive housing. I used to work for a nonprofit group called People Incorporated, and in that lifetime, I worked with that group to put those there. We are serving the permanent supportive housing communities in this area. As I said before, we're partnering with the Valley CSB in doing that. They have rental assistance for those folks. Right this second, the waiting list is open with the Stanton Housing Authority. then we do have a few units that are still vacant at a property in Stanton called Mountain Laurel Manor 3. They would certainly, it sounds like, qualify. Those units are set aside for very low income, 30% or less of the AMI. I don't know if you know Nehemiah Velez at the Stanton Housing Authority, but you could reach out to him or Audra Hutchin. We don't have many, but we got a few, and we'll have more in the spring. Mountain Laurel Manor 3 is the one that we do still have a few units available, and we will have more units available at a property called Middlebrook Trace in the spring.
So as I'm hearing the question and the thoughts around that, it sounds in some regards there may be some opportunities that are out there. So there's maybe gaps in access or understanding of what's available, what's out there, and how to connect people to those spaces potentially. As well as it sounds like there's also the need for additional housing stock, supportive housing stock to bridge that gap.
Yeah. I think the only thing I was going to add to that is circling back to the kind of the topic that we're sitting on is aging housing stock. When you get to the point where you're having to give a tent, we're treating a symptom. We're not going after necessarily. Might be a terrible example, but we have if homelessness and home affordability is a disease, well, we need to get to that part. And when we start looking at housing stock and its overall age, you know, the biggest disaster that we have is in the next 20 years when John Boy's entire village that he grew up in is going to be about 80 years old. And, you know, we're finding out that, yes, you know, we're going to be carbon dating this near the dinosaurs. You have no insulation. If we don't start getting ahead of that, and Waynesboro's a really great example. It's an old town. It's been old for a long time. It has lots of needs for rehabilitation. And if you don't start either building more homes than are depreciating out of the market, or two, building to get to some sustainable number and rehabilitate and keep yourself at some level of equilibrium, you will lose. That 5% in the next 10 years will jump to 10%. I make this example in Nelson County all the time. You equate it to you see all this new construction on 151. I can tell you for every new home that you see built along the 151 corridor, I can name 3 homes that I remember somebody's grandma lived in that are now so depreciated that you can't even recognize them past the red cedars. So, and that's my point to getting to that. We have to start addressing that housing stock. When Habitat is doing rehabilitations, developers need to be creating new stock so we got homes that are lasting 50 to 100 years. You know, it's a huge continuum, and we've got a 15-year disaster where we haven't kept up.
Okay. All right, I think we had time for one more. I see a hand here. Avi's back in the back there.
I'm wondering about short-term rentals and people buying, or not necessarily people, even companies buying up larger swaths of properties and using them as short-term rentals or Airbnb types, and limiting the amount of properties that one individual or company can rent out as an Airbnb. I'm not talking about like, you know, you have a couple sheds in your backyard and you rent those out as Airbnbs or something, or, you know, you have a room in your house or, you know, your other side of your duplex. I'm not talking about that, but companies or individuals that buy up a bunch of properties and then use those as Airbnbs, therefore limiting the amount of rentals that are available for people.
So, yeah, we actually deal with that directly. Habitat for Humanity, for the 30 years it's been around in Stanton, Augusta, and Waynesboro, has been building very close to downtown. Sure enough, 3 years ago, 4 different firms came through our neighborhood identifying every single homeowner, doing searches under who the lien holder was, and offering them at the time top dollar for their house in order to do just that. And fortunately, it didn't work. But yeah, for us, it's a real concern, especially because they're directly taking advantage of an underappreciated area of town, not by reality, but by perception.
Nelson County has 1,200 short-term rentals, and we have a population of 14,000 people and a housing stock of about 4,000 or 5,000. So, just to hit the audience with a real number that's pretty sizable. That industry in of itself is probably a $100 million industry in Nelson County, and it talk about a delicate dance on economic development and also preserving housing stock. Teachers' pay raises come from some of that money, but at the same time, if Joe the mechanic can't have a place to live, well, I'm usually Team Joe. There is a huge argument, especially in the urban context, about short-term rentals and their impact to direct long-term rental stock. The thing that we ran into in Nelson is we did find some value with short-term rentals in housing stock for one specific reason. Nobody's willing to buy a dilapidated building, refurbish it, and then turn it into a long-term rental, ever. No, it's either tear it down and build a quadplex or not. These entities came in, bought the building, refurbished it, and made it into a livable dwelling. Part of our mentality was, well, we did increase the housing stock in some ways, and they did keep up with the depreciation in some housing stock. We are in the middle of a pretty big change, though, because short-term rentals definitely don't probably belong in R1 and R2 designations in most cases. But as it relates to the agriculture side of this, is there a way that you can use? It's billions of dollars. How is it that they can generate new housing stock? Because this bubble's going to pop. We know it's happening. We're living it in Nelson County. People paid way too much money for these homes, and we're already starting to see some of them being offloaded. The problem that we're seeing in Nelson is your average short-term rentals value is at like $750,000. So it was never going to be rented for $1,250 a month. If anything, it was going to be some other person's second home from New York City. So it's kind of a delicate dance. I think what you're saying in Waynesboro, it's totally, I feel, a little bit more applicable there. It just depends geographically what that home could be if it's not that. Is it going to be a long-term rental, or is it going to be someone's second home? And in most cases, if it's worth $500,000 or more, it's probably going to be someone's second home.
All right, we're at time. With just 2 minutes left, I want to give each person up here the opportunity to say one last thing you wanted to say but haven't yet had a chance to say. And Tim, we are going to start with you down at that end.
Yeah. One thing that I did not mention earlier that I wanted to, but I forgot. By 2034, the number of people in the U.S. that are above the age of 65 will be greater than the number of people under the age of 18 for the first time ever in the United States. So that's a huge sea change in terms of our communities at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, in terms of as our generations age, as our kind of average age of the country continues to age up, like we're going to have to think about solutions and creating options and providing options for folks that will meet those needs as folks age. Housing options, providing affordable options or options that are affordable to everyone at any income, at the lowest incomes, but also such that there are options for folks who are middle income. And then again, when it comes to accessibility, that's going to be a huge issue moving forward. And so there needs to be, and Jen, you kind of talked about this and are applying it, there needs to be kind of a seismic shift in the way housing is developed into the future, such that when new housing is built, it'll last 100 years. Will it be able to provide a housing opportunity for folks, as children live there, as older adults live there? Because the lifespan of the house is going to continue to extend. And so we need to think really smartly about how we can create a housing stock that's going to be able to meet the needs of everyone going into the future.
Jen? Sorry, guys, I didn't really prepare a closing statement here.
She was listening.
I do just want to make sure that the person who asked that question before, Lydia, could I ask you to stand up? Meet Lydia. Could you find her and she can get you connected to her team? Oh, y'all know each other. Okay. See, I'm just trying to look out for your specific folks. I thought you had specific folks. Okay. Yeah, that's Sorry, guys. No, it's close.
Education was brought up. There happens to be an educator here in the audience, Brad Bryan from Valley Votech, who's got a dynamite program of actually training people to enter the workforce. The second point is I have 2 board members in my audience here, and I appreciate you coming out. And something occurred to me because we're habitat, and we're stuck in that same way of thinking, no matter how innovative we may think we are. And I wonder about our new 22 house development. Is there an opportunity for 44 living units? Yeah. Is you know, and I guess that's my takeaway from this session is thanks for helping me break my own habits.
Yeah. Boom, you just increased it.
And when he asks for the special use permit, show up. Yeah, last words real quick. All I can say is this, guys. Be advocates of those in government who are advocating for affordable housing. Seek them out, support them. It's a lonely road to hoe. I will tell you guys this. The popular answer for your city council, your board of supervisors, and your town councils is always to vote no. For the record. Why? Because we don't show up. Right? Those special interest groups that want to use whatever ism that's in their mind and use whatever justifying means for them to vote no, whether that's, they'll have some obscure ones, whether it's those people, them people, you know, water, environmentalism. At the end of the day, it comes down to people, and we need to support people. Housing is a right. People deserve to live somewhere. Advocate for those people. Advocate for people who are running for office. And one last thing, because manufactured housing has not come up. Manufactured housing has come a long way, and I know these guys over here bought a lot. Cardinal. You guys, yeah.
Okay, but let's be clear. Manufactured housing, modular housing?
That's a modular, yeah.
So modular is
Yes.
the equivalent of stick-built?
Yeah, exactly. But manufactured modular housing has a huge piece to talking about how rural America has acquired homes and has been one of the consistents. Look at your manufactured home communities. How can you advocate for those to be improved? Whether there's legislation that makes sense so that there can be some home ownership in there as well. I really think that that is the original tiny home. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about today's 2023 standard one. So, thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you all. Thank you. All right, we will have a break until 2:30, so we'll be starting back again at 2:30.